Jennifer asked me to tell the story of how I got involved with Habitat for Humanity, and we'll get around to that. But I have a couple of things to cover first. First of all is I am known as the very first Habitat volunteer in the world, which means nothing without you. If it weren't for all of you and all of the many others around the world, I'd be wandering around muttering, I'm first volunteer of Habitat for Humanity. People be going, Habitat for what? They only know it because of you, so thank you for what you've put into it. The other thing I like to say is, there's no great honor in being first. I could have been first in the meal line tonight. That'd be nice, but it's no honor. The real honor is going to go to the last volunteer, the person who lays the last block or nails the last nail and stands back and says, job done. Everybody on earth has a decent place to live, because that's our goal. I wanted so badly to be that person, but it's not going to work out that way. We're going to need generations of many volunteers to make it happen. So thank you for your contributions and for the work that you have done. I was talking to Dick King, and he was telling me about speaking at a church and using the old Millard model of speaking. He had heard Millard speak, and he had a few other things to help him. Well, I went to speak one time in upstate New York, in Buffalo. And I went to a Baptist church, and the pastor there was very conservative. He was very concerned about turning over his pulpit to somebody he didn't know, from some organization he didn't know. And so he got me aside and he said, now, I do not want you to get up here and just talk about Habitat for Humanity. He said, my people can get a brochure to tell them what Habitat for Humanity is. I want you to talk about your faith and about our Lord. So I got up there and I was speaking, and I got to a certain point. The week before, I had just gone, I was 45 years old, and I had just gone and gotten these things, the bifocals. And these are the nice ones, so that not everybody's supposed to know the vanity lenses, right? But if you've got those things, you know what it's like the first week, especially going up and down steps and things. You're watching very carefully. So I was starting to talk about that, and I said, because what came to me was a metaphor of having been at the ophthalmologist. So I'm talking about that, and I said, you know, I'm sitting there, and he's got me looking into this thing, and he says, now watch the plus signs. And as they come together, I was telling them, I said, you know, as we are building here on earth, God is building in heaven. We hear about it in Revelation, where he's building out of all these precious building materials and such. And I was trying to make the point that our homes that we build are just that precious to the families that get them. So I said, now, how all this comes into focus, I'm not sure, but I'm telling them about the ophthalmologist. And that week, he had shown me little lines, some like this and some like this. And he said, tell me when the lines come together. And I'm moving them into this form. When the pastor leaps up from the front row and hollers, hallelujah! It's that kind of church. And he runs up from the front row and he throws his arms around me like a football tackle. And he says, you just did it, brother. You connected with my congregation. You see that man down there on the front row? And I said, yeah. He said, he's the chairman of my deacons. I said, well, that's great. He said, you know what he does for a living? He's an ophthalmologist. Well, in all the confusion, even I, telling the story for the first time, wasn't realizing that what I was doing, not only were the lines coming together, but what did those lines form? The cross, through which our work is going to mate up with God's work and have meaning. So I told that story. So now let me tell you a little bit about getting started with Habitat. Millard and Linda started Habitat in September of 1976. And shortly after that, I got a knock on the door where I was living. And I opened it, and I had known Millard at Koinonia Farm before they went off to Africa. If you know their story, they went out to Africa and started to work and came back and then created Habitat. And there was Millard standing there. He didn't know me from Adam's house cat. He had met me, but he didn't remember me. Somebody else had brought him, and he was standing out by the car looking a little guilty, like, I brought Millard Fuller to your door. And Millard's standing there, and he sticks his hand out and says, hey, Clive, Millard Fuller. And so I said, I know who you are, Millard. And he said, come out to Koinonia tonight and see our slides from, it was called Zaire then, you know it as the Congo. But he said, come see him. Well, I was teaching school. I taught 7th and 8th grade, and I was teaching reading and social studies. And I taught the year before Roots, the book Roots was published, about the man finding his roots in Africa. I taught the year of that publication and the year after. And the last year I taught in a school where literally no child in our school, 7th and 8th grade, could read his or her own name. That's how bad things were. It was a really deprived school. So here I am teaching. Fortunately, Roots was playing on television, and fortunately the vast majority of our kids were African American, so they were taken in by this, and we could talk about it during the day, and I could read it to them from the newspaper because it was also being serialized there. But Millard had me out to see these slides, and it was the old-fashioned slideshow, you know, the ones where you push the button, it goes ka-chunk, ka-chunk. And so about every third slide, there were 6 or 7 people in the room, 4 or 5 elderly black women who worked in the Koinonia Farm pecan industries, if you know what Koinonia Farm is, where all this idea was born. And then there was Chris Fuller, Millard's 14-year-old son, and Millard and me. And about every third slide, Millard would holler in his way, I know! The next volunteer for Zaire is in this room tonight. And I'm looking around the room, and I finally figured out, I said, I think this fool is thinking about me. And I'm not going to Africa. Well, very long story short, I did wind up going to Africa, but what really made this thing happen was one day in my classroom, I was trying desperately to teach these kids. And a little girl said, why do we have to learn this old stuff anyway? Well, what 7th and 8th grader hadn't asked that question at some point? But I said to her, because if you get an education, you'll have a better life. She came back at me just like that, and she said, yeah, that's what they told my mama. So that evening, I thought, I need to talk to Mama. And I went to find the mama and found them living in a shack in a cornfield in South Georgia. No doors, no windows, no running water, no electricity, and no hope. What reason did that little girl have to believe that anything I said would come true for her? So I got involved with Habitat, and a few years later, we built a house for a young woman named May Pearl. Now this story is important because people ask me all the time, we know your story, whatever happened to the little girl? How do I know? I went off to my big adventure. But May Pearl, while she's not that little girl from that classroom, was very like her. So she got her house. She was a single parent with 4 girls. In those days, we built houses with very low-cost materials, particle board, siding, that doesn't last very long, especially if you don't keep it up very, very well. And May Pearl wasn't competent to keep her house up. So it started to show wear and tear very quickly, and was an embarrassment in the neighborhood that we had built. And Millard would ask me, he said, what do you do when you get people, because we would take people through there to see our work, and get to May Pearl's and be embarrassed. And he said, what do you do to get people not to pay attention in May Pearl's house? And I'm a bird watcher, so I said, I pointed out an ivory-billed woodpecker one time. There it goes, the last one of its species. Anything to get people to not look at that house. But we had groups. If you've heard about it, Habitat has partners that work with people and family partnerships and trying to help people through their first years of home ownership and taking possession and understanding how to be good homeowners. So we started there. We started helping homeowners in those days to try to understand the responsibilities of home ownership. And May Pearl wasn't getting it. And we tried until one day, several of her neighbors came to see her. May Pearl was African American, and all of her neighbors were African American women, and they were all Habitat homeowners, and they came to see May Pearl, and they filed into her living room, and they sat down, and they said, May Pearl, we've come to talk to you about your house. And May Pearl burst into tears, and she said, y'all, it ain't my fault. That's good English where I come from. Y'all, it ain't my fault, and here's the real core of Habitat. This is Jesus speaking, if I ever heard it. One of the homeowners spoke up and said, May Pearl, we didn't come here about fault. We came to tell you that if you want to get it back in order, we'll help you. Is that not what Christ says to us? I didn't come here to talk to you about blame or the problems that you have. I came to say, if you want to get your life in order, let's get busy. So May Pearl did, and they went to work, and they got her house back in order. If we were in Americus, Georgia today, I would have you sitting there with us as we talk right in front of May Pearl's house. It's not perfect, but it's come a long way. What happened next was the real miracle. May Pearl decided to go out to our technical college and get her GED. There you are, my little girl, who had never finished high school, who hadn't learned, but now decides that it's not too late. There's an opportunity for her. So she goes out to the technical college and gets serious and gets her GED. And I heard about it, and I called her into my office and said, May Pearl, here's a check for $35. It was the cost of taking the test. You tell your friends, because I'd heard her friends were getting excited and wanted to go out there too. They were thinking, if May Pearl, who's the least among us, can do this, then surely we can. And none of them had their GED. So I said, you tell your friends to let me know when they pass their test, and they'll get a check too. I got no peace. These ladies kept me informed constantly about their progress, until finally it got down to one last one named Jessie. And Jessie started making excuses. The others had graduated, and we'd gone out over and over and clapped as they walked across the stage in those little plastic gowns and caps and gotten their diplomas. But Jessie started saying, well, I don't want to go. I'm alone now, and none of my friends are there because we're all done except me. She said, I don't like to drive at night. She began to make all these excuses. It was May Pearl who called the other women together and said, we cannot let Jessie fail. We have to set up a driving schedule. We'll take her out there, take that excuse away from her. We'll sit in the classroom and hold her hand if we have to. We'll do everything but take the test, but we cannot let Jessie fail. And sure enough, the day came when we went back out there to watch Jessie walk across that stage. I retired 9 years ago. And just as I retired, two great things happened. Millard died 10 years ago, Millard Fuller. And at his memorial service in Atlanta, I was actually in Guatemala building houses. So I wasn't present for that. When I got home, there was a CD on my desk, and I put it into the computer. Don't need them anymore now. You can just go online and see this stuff. But there was Millard's memorial service. And there was a young man sitting on the front row with the family. And I knew all the family, so I couldn't figure out who this was. And he laughed when there was laughter. You know how memorial services go. Wept when there were tears. And finally the camera switched around, and he was standing at the podium. And he said, I bring you greetings from Sisters, Oregon, where 40 families live in good housing because of Habitat. This got a warm applause from the crowd. And I thought, isn't that lovely? They sent one of their young volunteers to be here and speak for Millard. And then he said, I was 10 years old when Habitat found me and my family in a house where ice grew on the inside of the walls during the wintertime and mold during the summertime because the walls were still damp. He said, my sisters and I were too young to help build the house, but we planted the apple trees in the front yard, and we've enjoyed apples from those trees over the years. And then he said this, and now today, well, not exactly today, but in a few months, I'm going to graduate a doctor from Harvard University.
Wow.
Can you think what that did to me? This guy who left the classroom because a little girl lived in a shack, and I wanted to help kids get better. And then on his graduation day, right before I retired, I was in North Carolina with a group, and our videographers were there. We were waiting to go out to a house dedication. And one of them called me over, and he hit the switch on his computer, and there it was. Judah's standing there, Linda Fuller standing next to him, has a white carnation in his lapel for Millard, and he's holding that diploma. And this is what he said. Today, I got my toolkit. Millard Fuller changed the world with his, and I'm going to change the world with mine. And I just melted. And these camera guys have been trying to get me crying through those interviews that I'd done, and they never got me to do it. So here I am melted. They don't have the camera, so one of them goes running for it. When he gets back, I'm all dried up, and I'm going, I'm over it, I'm over it. But almost the same day, I got an email from another one of those women in Americas, whose name was Mary Cross. And Mary Cross still empties garbage cans at Habitat. She got a late start in life. She, like May Pearl and the others, had not succeeded in school. But she was one of those who went out there and got her GED. And so she continued to learn. She kept going. And I would hear her every day when she came by at the end of the day, dumping the garbage cans, because that's what she did. She helped on our maintenance crew. And she would be coming down the hallway, and I'd turn off the computer or get off the phone, because here came Mary, and she was going to want to give me the latest report. And what I got in that email was an invitation from Mary saying, please come back out and watch me walk across that stage one more time to pick up my 2-year diploma that's going to allow me to have a daycare center in my home, my now paid for Habitat home. Can you imagine the impact of that woman when she's taking care of little kids and she's saying to them every day, little 3, 4, 5, 6 years old kids, when you get down there to that schoolhouse, sit up and pay attention, because it's important what they've got to tell you. When you get to junior high or high school, don't you mess around and get pregnant and lose your life to that. You pay attention. Imagine that. We talk about salt and light and yeast. Those were the beginning days of Habitat. The economics of Jesus, Millard called it. And that's salt and light and yeast in the best way you can find it. As these lives that we help, you're going to hear more of that when your actual 20th anniversary comes, and I guarantee you better bring a handkerchief when you hear those young people talk about the ways that their Habitat house has affected their lives. We are not just building for now, we are building for the future. One last quick story on that. I got introduced a few years ago at a Habitat event, a youth event in Atlanta. And the day I got there, a woman came up to me and said, would you mind if my young son comes over and asks you some questions? It was a youth event, and so I thought, sure, why is the kid's mother coming to talk to me? Well, then eventually he comes over, and he's a little kid. And he asked me his questions, and the next night he gets up to introduce me to speak. And he gets up there and he says, my name is Trinity. He tells his last name. He said, and I'm growing up in a Habitat house. If somebody had socked me in the stomach with their fist, it couldn't have taken the wind out of me more, because nobody had prepared me. And when I got to the pulpit, I was sobbing for a whole 30 seconds or so, and the audience started sobbing with me. What greater honor than to be introduced by one of these kids? So I made my speech, and I told that story about Judah Sofkowski from Sisters. It got a warm applause, nice standing ovation from the kids. And when I came down off the pulpit, there was Trinity again. And he says, my name's Trinity, and I'm in the 8th grade, and I'm going to Duke University Law School on a full scholarship. And I'm like, wait, what? He says, no, I'm still in the 8th grade. I got a lot of work to do, but I'm going to go to Duke University Law School on a full scholarship. And here comes Mama again. And she says, he will too. She said, when Habitat found us, we were living in a shelter for abused women and children, hiding from his father. And she said they came there and they were taking applications and telling us about it. And she said, I filled out the application. It seemed to me like everything was going well. And then somebody mentioned sweat equity. She said they told me I was going to have to help build my house. And she said everything in me just crumpled up like a dried leaf, because that man had told me I was a nothing and I was a nobody. I couldn't do anything and I couldn't learn anything. And I had bought the whole package, because that's the way it works, right? when abuse is going on, they just destroy you. And this woman had felt destroyed. And she puts her fist up in the air like this, and she said, then Habitat put that hammer in my hand, and they taught me how to use it. And as I built my house, I built myself. Isn't that powerful? She says, I went on to get my GED, and I got my college diploma, and that boy right there, he's going to Duke University Law School on a full scholarship. That's what we get to do every single day, no matter what capacity we serve in, no matter how we help Habitat for Humanity, we get to help make those stories come true. Thank you so much for all that you have done here faithfully for 20 years. Keep it up for the next 20 and prepare another generation to take over after that. God bless you. Keep up the great work.